Hello and welcome back to the Sussex, Ontario Election Show. This is our third episode, which we're webcasting to you. I'm Joe Ragusa, I'm principal here at the firm. It's our pleasure to bring this to you, our viewers, our clients, our associates, and people who have an interest in all things Ontario government, politics, and the Ontario election. I'm joined today by Jeff Silverstein, Senior Associate here at our firm. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you very much.
And Jeff, just for the people who may not have had the chance to get to know you until now, maybe you could spend just a minute talking a little bit about your own professional background and what you do here.
Sure. So I've been with Sussex for the better part of 3 years now. Prior to that, I was a journalist at CTV for about 10 years, working at W5 as a producer. I worked at the CBC as well, but really I spent most of my career as an investigative journalist, going after the kinds of stories that we've seen most recently about Patrick Brown.
So we'll get to him in a minute. Certainly then managing issues through the media and the public domain is right in your sweet spot. That's what you do, and been a great addition to the firm here, helped a lot of our clients with issues in the public domain. So thanks for joining us today.
Good to be here.
So some of you may have seen Jeff before on different television channels talking about what else, the PC leadership process. And just for the benefit of continuity, from the last time we were on, which was last Friday at noon, Patrick Brown had re-entered the leadership race that was created by his resignation. And within 3 days, I think, after we were on, he subsequently withdrew from the race.
It's the most unconventional leadership race in Canadian political history. To have someone resign twice is unprecedented. And I think that most people, when he entered the race that second time, were convinced that he would stick it out, that he would have been prepared for the heat that would have been coming his way and the scrutiny that would have been coming his way. But obviously it got personal, it got just a little too intense for him, and I think that he made the decision to back out, largely because he probably felt that he couldn't win it as well. I think that had to be part of his calculation.
Well, I mean, it may be a combination of personal and the political calculus that goes into this. I certainly saw a number of articles about him, more on the personal side, a little bit of innuendo about some of the things he did or should have done or didn't do, even as head of the party, that all came out in that period after he had re-entered the race. So I guess it got to be too much, but it is what it is. He's not in the race now. We're back to the 4 candidates we had.
We are, but he's still a force, and we saw that in the last debate. And he will remain a force in this whole leadership race right up until the 8th of March, when people will have finished casting their ballots, and then when it's announced on the 10th.
Okay, so you touched on it. Just tell everybody that today, March 2nd, is actually the first day of voting, and that voting continues. It's an online process until March the 8th.
That's right. And they've extended it. They've extended it till Monday. The deadline was going to be today to enter your verification code and upload your identification to be eligible to vote. They realized that the timelines were really short. They extended it to Monday, which is probably a good thing, because a lot of people apparently, and the campaigns are all concerned about this, all 4 campaigns, are saying that a lot of their supporters have not received their envelope in the mail. Okay. And that's a real issue. So that extra day on Monday will be obviously very important.
So what was extended from today to Monday was the registration period.
That's right.
So, and what Jeff's talking about, and I have a friend of mine who received his in the mail, joined the PC party, received this letter, and there's instructions and a verification code on what to do to register. He told me, we had Doug Ford on last weekend, or last Friday, and he mentioned that some people were saying the registration process was a little cumbersome. The guy that gave me this, he said he did it in 5 minutes.
You know, for some people it is straightforward, and for others it's complicated. It depends, I suppose, on how familiar you are with computers and that sort of thing. But it is an issue. There's no question about it. Some of the membership are going to have issues with it. I had someone call me the other day and say that he was having problems, and I said, try substituting a 0 for an O, or vice versa. And that turned out to work for him. So, so there are going to be some snags in the whole process.
Sure. Now, the voting itself, so we've got 4 candidates, and the winner will be the candidate who receives 50% of the votes plus 1.
Mm-hmm.
Given that there's 4 candidates, it's unlikely that any one of them will win it on the first ballot.
I think it's very unlikely.
Yeah.
I think they all recognize that, and I think that if you look at the debates very closely, all of the candidates are attempting to court the supporters of their opponents to one degree or another.
Right. So let's just, for the benefit of people who are less familiar with it, it's a preferential ballot system where voters, party members, will be asked to indicate who their first choice is, their second choice, and their third choice for leader. So people will actually vote once, but we might hear the results of the second ballot, the
That's
results
right.
of the third ballot.
That's right, and so the person that is last will be knocked out of the race. Their second ballots will be put back into the hopper, so to speak, and it'll be recalculated, and it'll go from there.
Okay, so we may have multiple ballots, and I believe that people in the party who vote for this, you don't have to indicate who your second and third choice is. You have to indicate somebody, your first choice. But you don't necessarily have to say, and this is my second choice, and this is my third choice. You could indicate a first and a second, or a first, second, and third.
That's right.
And then they'll get into the counting, and ultimately somebody, I guess just like whoever's last on the first ballot drops off, whoever's last on the second ballot will drop off, and when there's 2 left, somebody's going to get 50% plus 1.
That's right, and I think that the other thing that's really important here that perhaps a lot of people don't appreciate, excuse me, is that there are 124 ridings across the province. Each riding is weighted equally and is worth 100 points. So no matter where that riding is, there's 100 points to be had. And no matter how many people vote in that riding, the percentage that the candidate gets will equal the number of points out of 100. What that means is that all of these candidates need to work at winning all of these ridings. It's not enough to depend on the GTA ridings and the larger ridings, and it's why you're seeing them travel across the province in a frantic way.
So signing up 50,000 people in Mississauga gets you to a point, but
That's
it's not
right.
going to carry the day for you.
So in the case of Doug Ford, who has a lot of traction in the GTA, and we know that based on the last mayoral election, which you talked about last Friday, that's all well and good for Doug, but he's not going to win it on that alone. He's got to resonate and connect with people across the province.
And we did have Doug Ford on last Friday, and it was good because he helped our viewership numbers climb from 1.7 to 2.2 thousand. So that was helpful and useful. And we do plan to have other elected people on the show as we go forward. So you mentioned the debates. Now, my observation from the first debate, the TVO debate, moderated by Steve Paikin, was that the 4 candidates for sure didn't get into any kind of policy discussion, and it seemed like they were kind of gentle with each other, and nobody wanted to offend anybody, maybe because they were thinking about second ballot.
Those second ballots, I think they were still sort of feeling things out. They didn't want to come across as too aggressive and too brash coming out the gate. So I think that in part explains why they were nice to one another. I think, the last debate, the second debate, was the last debate. And so, the candidates realized that the gloves had to come off. That was their last opportunity to project the kind of strength that they all know they need to project to be viewed by the membership as someone that can take on a sitting premier.
Well, and I think even the staunchest conservative will admit that Kathleen Wynne is pretty good as a debater and pretty good as a campaigner. So if that's a quality that PC party members are looking for, the debate was the opportunity to demonstrate that you have what it takes.
No question, and I think what you saw in the last debate is that you saw Doug and Christine, I think, emerging as the front runners, and certainly the polls are supporting that. And they were prior to the debate. So I think that dictated their approach and their tactics in the debate. I think, Doug felt that he needed to project that kind of strength, so he went after Christine more than the other candidates because he felt she was the one to beat. I think Tanya Granick-Allen, someone who wasn't known at all to most people in the province, She herself was going after Caroline Mulroney in a fairly aggressive way.
And Patrick Brown. She just wouldn't let that go.
No, she wouldn't. And she went after Christine as well. She's trying to get their second votes. And, I think that there was another debate after that. Caroline didn't attend it. It was in London, Ontario. It was not as high profile a debate, but really right now it's going to come down to the candidates getting out in front of the media, because there is no more debate. People now have the opportunity to start voting. So you're going to see them all trying to get in front of cameras and in front of reporters as much as they can.
I would think so, and they seem to be largely in lockstep in terms of their policy discussions. I was intrigued. I thought Caroline Mulroney is attempting to come across as someone who's thoughtful and well considered, and maybe suffered a little bit on the charisma side, that maybe she might have come across a little mild for someone seeking a party leadership.
She has come across, I think, as someone who I think has looked a bit unprepared for the job at hand. I think that in the debates, the consensus of opinion was that she didn't perform as well as her supporters for sure had hoped she would. She looks sometimes like she's searching for answers. She just doesn't have the experience that the other two, Christine and Doug, have. So, I think that she's struggled a bit, no question about it.
I think she did depart from the others on things like some of the education discussions that maybe Tanya Granick-Allen took her to task on. But nonetheless, I think that what we're seeing evolve here as the field. You remember when the field, before everybody was official and in the race, there's a lot of speculation as to who would enter, and I think the media and the pundits got them all right, except that there was an expectation that Rod Phillips, who's the nominated candidate in Ajax for the PCs, would enter the race. And at the time, there was all this talk about how Doug Ford would appeal to the more of the right-wing type PC member, and that Mulroney, Elliott, and Rod Phillips would kind of battle it out for the progressive, more centrist PC party members. My observation is that, okay, so Phillips didn't enter, obviously, but so Ford has behaved and performed as expected, and I think Mulroney has kind of stayed to that closer to the center than the others. Christine Elliott seems to have veered a little bit rightward while trying to kind of hang on to the center, but it's kind of over here. Have you noticed that?
I have, and I think, one of the things that I think that has contributed to that shift to the right is the entrance of Tanya Granick-Allen, actually. She's a fringe candidate, so to speak, but she's firmly entrenched in that position, and she's been very outspoken in these debates, and she's performed quite well. I think she's pushing, she's feisty. Yeah. And the other perception is that Doug has set the agenda, because I think that he came out of the gate early, certainly on the carbon tax issue and other social conservative issues, and sort of staked his position. And he did that very early, and I think Christine and Caroline looked like they were following in his footsteps. But I think that what's interesting for a lot of people is that people believed that Christine would stake out that moderate position. That was kind of her brand.
Well, that's what she did in 2015 when she ran against Patrick Brown, unsuccessfully.
Yeah.
So we feel, and well, let me ask you, as a professional communicator and someone that gives advice on this, there's kind of a dual challenge here. If you're one of these four candidates, you're trying to win a vote that is limited to progressive conservative party members, those more on the right, those more in the center. That's your audience, right? That's your market. And so you're saying things to them to win their vote. The challenge is that the media, the general public, the liberals, and the New Democrats are watching and recording everything. If you're a candidate, how do you get your message, your winning message, to PC party members without compromising what whoever wins the leadership will have to say to all voters later?
You know what I think, Joe? I think the calculation that they've all made is that the direction they're going in is where they need to go to win this leadership race. And then after that, the feeling is that the Liberals are so deeply unpopular that they'll stick to those positions. They're not going to change, they're not going to pivot, but that the electorate, the larger electorate in Ontario, is so unhappy with the 15 years of Liberal government that it doesn't matter. They're willing to look the other way on some of those issues.
Well, and certainly the polls that have come out since Brown resigned all have the PCs ahead.
Yeah.
In some cases ahead by quite a bit. And you mentioned it was Main Street, one of the reputable polling firms, came out with a poll of just PC party members. Not sure how they found them, but they did. And I think we're looking at Doug Ford running kind of mid to high 30s%.
36, I think.
Elliott in the low 30s.
Yep, 33.
And Mulroney in the 20s.
Yeah.
And Tanya Granick-Allen trailing.
Yeah.
I don't think that Mrs. Granick-Allen's placement surprises. Is it your sense from the people that you talk to and what you've read and what you've observed, are Doug Ford and Christine Elliott the two front runners in this race now?
I think so. I think that's the feeling, that's the consensus of opinion in the media. And I think if you look at the performance in the debate, the last debate, I think that they were the two strongest performers in the debate. So I think that's true.
Now, one member, one vote. It's not a delegated convention, as we've seen, which makes for good television, but every member votes. Whether it was 100,000, 200,000, or somewhere in between, there were a lot of party members that signed up under Patrick Brown's leadership. Some for nomination purposes,
Yeah.
some for leadership purposes. Where do they go?
Well,
What are
that
they
is,
doing?
you know what, that is the million-dollar question, and that is what's going to dictate the outcome of this whole thing, which is why he remains a force right up until the end. And they're all trying to court his supporters in one way or another. And on the delicate question of what they would do in the event that they win with respect to Patrick being able to be in the party has been a tricky question for all of them. But where they go will ultimately decide who wins this, no question about it.
Well, there seem to be a lot of them, and they're a bit of a flock without a shepherd once their candidate withdrew again. We obviously don't know what's going to happen, but I think it was, especially in the first debate, when the candidates, other than Tanya Granick-Allen, who clearly has no use for Patrick Brown, we're all kind of in this space that said, well, if he can clear his name, he can run for us, and we're going to let him rehabilitate his reputation a little bit, and if he does that satisfactorily, I'll sign his nomination papers, unlike interim PC leader Vic Fedeli, who said, I'm not signing his papers.
Well, we know that those votes, those crucial votes, we don't know how much support there is out there for Patrick, but they're certainly not going to Tanya Granick-Allen. We know that.
That's for sure.
And they're not going to Caroline Mulroney, because Caroline Mulroney was very strident on the whole question of asking for him to step out of the race. So all of those supporters have put those two candidates out the window. So it comes down to Christine and to Doug. And I think that we know that Patrick really cultivated a lot of the ethnic communities when he won the leadership race himself. Those are communities that Doug has tapped into quite well, and we know that his brother Rob did as well. So I think that Doug probably, on balance, stands to capture more of Patrick's supporters than Christine.
The other thing, and we're gonna spend the second half of our show talking about the carbon tax and helping people understand what all that talk is. It seems that that's one area where all four candidates have agreement, that they have no use for a carbon tax. And if they become leader and premier, they're not going to continue with the cap and trade carbon tax that's in place now. This could be one of those questions, because Doug Ford on this show last Friday said 90% of Conservative members oppose the carbon tax. I think I saw some polling this week where the general public, it's about half of people do support a carbon tax as a good climate change initiative. Any worries? How do they reconcile this coming out? I mean, if the assumption is that Conservatives generally are not in favor of new or increased taxes, that's grade 8 civics. How do we reconcile this position that they're taking with their own party members to the greater public?
Well, I think that there's no question there's a lot of conservatives out there that do believe in climate change and don't agree with the positions that all four candidates have taken. But they're going to vote for somebody. So as an issue, it may be important, and it is important for a lot of people, but they're going to look at other things. They're going to look at leadership quality and strength of leadership, and who is best really positioned to defeat Kathleen Wynne. And then there are other issues that are, I think you could argue, more pressing, like healthcare, which consumes the biggest chunk of the provincial budget. There's education, and then there's the deficit. Between those three things, those are the real major issues. So I think that the carbon tax is a big issue, no question about it. But I don't think that any of them are risking losing any of those potential supporters.
Well, I mean, if they're all in agreement that they don't want to do it, then nobody who's casting a ballot is going to have a reason to be for or against any of them.
That's right.
Because they're united on that one. They're unanimous, and they just won't do it.
That's right.
Again, in the second half of our show, we're going to talk to Robyn Gray from who's the VP of our our environment practice, to talk about the carbon tax, the cap and trade, what it means. Jeff, thanks so much for doing this. I know you're busy.
Thanks,
and
John.
For those people that had lunch at their desk today, I hope they enjoyed watching it.
Thanks very much.
All right, thank you. So coming up, we're going to have Robyn, who's our VP of our environment practice, coming up and talking to us, helping us to make sense of all of this discussion around cap and trade and carbon tax and California and the federal government and what it all means. So stay with us. We'll be right back after this quick break.
For 20 years, Sussex Strategy Group has helped companies and organizations navigate government and bring about successful policy change. Our team of experts understand that it takes more than meetings and phone calls to turn heads and change opinion. It takes insight, strategy, and deep domain knowledge to get things done. In a world that's constantly changing, one thing stays the same. Sussex Strategy Group helps you win. Visit sussex-strategy.com right now and let us help you today. Sussex Strategy Group, 20 years of getting you results.
Looking to take your digital advocacy to the next level? Get in touch with our team at Sussex Adrenaline. Sussex Adrenaline is Canada's most awarded digital public affairs agency. Using our proprietary advocacy platform, Vox, supporters of our clients' campaigns have sent over 1 million letters to their local politicians advocating for change. Let us help you design your next advocacy campaign and get the results you need to win. Sussex Adrenaline, digital that actually gets you results.
Before we get into our in-depth discussion about carbon taxes, we just wanted to give a bit of a shout out to our own Sussex Adrenaline team that just this past week won some pretty significant awards. They're called the READ Awards. They are put out by Campaigns and Elections Magazine, a US-based publication that really is the publication for our world. Sussex Adrenaline, they were finalists in a number of categories, including Best International Firm, so congratulations on that. But beyond being finalists, the Adrenaline team here actually won 2 READ Awards. They won the award for Best Canadian Website, so congratulations to the team, and also the Best Canadian Online Campaign. So this is a digital advocacy part of Sussex that some of you may not be familiar with. I'd encourage you, if you're not, to go onto our website, sussex-strategy.com, and you can learn more about the Adrenaline team, or you can talk to one of us, and we'll tell you all about it. So we're joined now by Robyn Gray. Robyn is our Vice President of our environmental practice here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So Robyn, we thought for people that are watching us, clients, associates, affiliates that maybe are not completely up to speed on all this talk about carbon taxes, and because certainly in the PC leadership campaign, right from the get-go, it's been a topic of conversation. And even before that, it was dealt with in the PC party platform published last November by Patrick Brown, and we don't know how much of it is going to survive into the next election, into the new platform of the next leader. But you know, for those of us who are not as close to this as you are, I mean, I'm hearing we won't do a carbon tax. Some people think we already have a carbon tax. We hear talk about cap and trade. We hear talk that it's a federal thing, it's a provincial thing. News is coming out of Saskatchewan that they're not doing one. So I guess that's what it kind of looks like and sounds like to people who aren't in your space.
Right.
So maybe to start, we do have something called the Climate Change Initiative that we are dealing with, right?
Yep.
So can you just give people kind of the 101 on where Ontario is at today?
Sure, and it is a good question because there is a lot of I think a lot of confusing terms out there right now, but Ontario does have a carbon pricing system in place right now, and they've had it. It's the cap and trade system, and it's been in place since January 2017. After extensive consultation with the public, with industry, in terms of whether to go with a carbon tax or to go with cap and trade. So it basically, what cap and trade is it's a market mechanism, a market system that allows the government to put a hard cap on the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from our business and industry, but allows flexibility in terms of how those businesses and industries can meet that cap. And the cap itself it puts a limit on the tons of carbon that can be emitted from the different facilities in the province.
So from a factory, an office building, everyone's going to have a number.
For the different sectors that are included in the cap and trade program. So that includes most industrial emitters that emit more than 25,000 tons. You can opt in if you like, but the focus is on that group, as well as natural gas generators. So what that limit, that cap that's in place, it's supposed to decline over time. So in Ontario right now, the compliance period started in 2017. It'll wrap up in 2020. We'll move on to the next compliance period, but for this first period, that cap will decline around 4% every year. So if facility A finds itself above its cap, it has to go to the market to purchase allowances or go to the auction that's been set up and buy enough allowances or carbon credits to cover off those extra emissions that they've emitted over their cap. And this is where that trade aspect comes in. So on the other hand, though, if a facility is below their cap that's been set for them, they can actually take those extra allowances and sell them back into the market. And essentially, if you pollute less, you pay less into the system.
So there's a financial incentive to pollute less and a financial penalty if you pollute more.
Right.
Okay, so Ontario's had some auctions with where these credits have been put up for sale, and they've been people have bought them, they're fully subscribed?
Yeah, so they've had, in the first year of the period, the first year of the compliance period was Ontario only, so they were trying it out to make sure that they got all the kinks out of the system, and so those first 4 auctions that took place last year, all but one were fully subscribed, and through that auction process, they raised $1.9 billion, and that money is not going to general revenue, it's not going to...
I can't have it for healthcare?
No, you can't have it for healthcare, but it can go to different initiatives in hospitals that will lead to energy efficiency. So that money is only going towards projects that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions or potentially offset future emissions.
And that's by legislation?
That's by legislation.
It must be spent in those areas?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So how many of these auctions have they had so far?
They've had 5 so far. The last one that they had was the first one in the new joint carbon market with California and Quebec. And so that one was a bit different in that it was a much bigger market. There was a lot more allowances available. And I think there was some uncertainty as to how successful that first one would be, given the uncertainty in Ontario, and also because this is actually the first auction in the new compliance period for California and Quebec, so there was a thought that maybe they wouldn't do so well, but they actually sold 100% subscription to those credits, and Ontario raised close to $476 million just in this auction a week ago.
So am I close when I say that over 4 years of these auctions, the government looks to realize about $8 billion?
That's their projection, yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned California and Quebec,
Mhm.
and certainly that's come up as well during the PC leadership discussions and
Yeah.
debate. Tell our viewers a little bit about the relationship between Ontario, Quebec, and California in this cap and trade carbon pricing world.
Sure, it actually goes back a while ago to around 2008 when there was more discussion across jurisdictions about what to do to mitigate climate change, and there was discussion then about setting up a cap and trade system under this umbrella organization called the Western Climate Initiative. And at that point, everyone was gearing towards putting this system in place. 2008, 2009 happened, the economy didn't do so well. Ontario stopped paying attention to that for a while, but California, Quebec, and other jurisdictions continued to move forward in implementing a cap and trade system. So we saw California get up and running, Quebec get up and running. They've been doing their systems now for 5 to 6 years. And it wasn't until the Wynne government got their majority that they said, we're getting back into this, and they came out with their climate change strategy. So it was always in the background, and Ontario's never really left the WCI. They've always stayed involved. But this was an ability to spread out and really strengthen the market by including other jurisdictions. And what it allows is for prices to stay down, for the cost of carbon to stay down. If Ontario kept its own market, the price per ton of carbon would be $100 within 3 years. But because we have options and more fluidity in the market and accessing credits from other jurisdictions, that will keep the price lower for industry and consumers in the long run.
Okay, great. So provinces in Canada are able to create their own pricing on carbon, and I think you mentioned Quebec and Ontario, who are doing a similar thing.
Yep.
I think British Columbia went the route of a straight carbon tax.
Yes.
And very recently in the media, we're seeing reports out of Saskatchewan that says that province isn't going to do anything.
Right.
Now, in the People's Guarantee, the PC platform that came out last November, the PC party said, we're going to abandon that cap and trade system that the Ontario government has put in place, which you just described, and we're just going to do the federal way.
Right.
So while provinces are able to do their individual thing, the federal government's kind of lurking there. And is it right to say that provinces that don't implement their own carbon pricing scheme, that the feds will step in and do it for them?
Yes, that's exactly what they're going to do. So this really started, the rejigged or the reinvigorated approach to climate change started in 2015, and really off the heels of the Paris Agreement, which was the global agreement on mitigating climate change, and really set the tone for the amount of action and intent that the federal government was going to have to do this. And so what came out that following year was the development of the Pan-Canadian Framework on Climate Change, with almost all provinces signing on, except at the time for, I believe, Manitoba and Saskatchewan. And a big component of that plan was to establish a carbon price across the country. As you mentioned, though, some jurisdictions during time of relative inaction on climate change on the federal level went ahead and set their own carbon price in their own system. PC was actually first at the gate with their tax in 2008. So I think rightly so, the federal government said we can't just make you get rid of all your systems. And it makes a lot of sense too, because every jurisdiction should have an ability to choose the right system for them, because a carbon tax may work better in one jurisdiction, cap and trade may work in another, depending on the makeup of your economy. So to fill in the gaps, I guess, the federal government said, if you don't come up with your own plan, whether it's a carbon tax or cap and trade, we'll bring forth this federal backstop, as they're calling it, and essentially impose a carbon tax into your jurisdiction.
Okay, and I think part of it, and listen, I look at political documents all of the time, and it seemed to me that the PC platform essentially said, we're going to get rid of the Ontario cap and trade system, we're going to fall back on the federal regime because, in part, I think the federal government has said that any carbon taxes that they collect will be returned to the province where that carbon tax comes from. And this was how Patrick Brown was going to fund things like an income tax cut.
Right,
Is that right?
right. But
So-
there's been a twist since
Okay.
then. So in the exciting world of all this, so in the regulatory proposal that the feds came out with earlier this year about the federal backstop, it says that if you agree to be part of this, if you allow the federal government to impose this tax in your jurisdiction, the money will still go to your jurisdiction, and you have full right to say where that money goes. If you don't, if it has to be forced upon you, the federal government can actually decide how it's spent. It can go directly to the taxpayers through the federal side, or they can do it through the province, but it's really up to the federal government to decide how the taxpayers, how that money is spent in that jurisdiction, which puts a bit the PC platform and where the current leadership wants to go with this in a bit of a sticky situation, because if they hold out, they may lose, and they don't win a constitutional challenge against all of this, like Saskatchewan wants to do, they could essentially lose power over where that money goes.
Right. And did Manitoba also, you mentioned Manitoba and Saskatchewan initially didn't sign on, but I think Manitoba since then has come around.
They have come around. I think they looked into it. They were looking to, look at the Constitution and see if the federal government was in the right to do this. I think we've all seen the federal government can impose tax where they see fit. And so Manitoba said, okay, we're going to be part of this, and they're actually coming up with their own carbon tax system right now, provided that it's up to snuff to the federal government. So they've signed on.
Okay, so back to Ontario then, when the PC leadership candidates say, we're not going to do a carbon tax, and at least a couple of them have said, and if the federal government tries to force us to do one, we'll take them to court. This is that constitutional challenge you
Yes,
referenced a minute
yeah.
ago? So Manitoba looked at that and said, we probably are not going to win that, so
Right.
we might as well do a carbon regime on our own,
Right.
Okay, so we're not lawyers,
No.
but in the most likely scenario then, if the PCs win the election in June and they do, I'm not saying that's the most likely scenario, they probably won't get the federal government off of this, either
Right.
constitutionally or however.
Right.
So what does that mean if you're one of these companies that bought carbon credits at auction through the cap and trade system that you've spent quite a bit of money on, and now can you sell those credits into Quebec and California, maybe at a discount? Like, what happens then?
That's a good question, and I don't think it's been fully fleshed out. I'm sure that I would assume that in the Western Climate Initiative there are rules around what happens if a jurisdiction pulls out, but I don't know if an industry or a emitter will have the ability to sell those credits back into the system and get that money back. In the People's Guarantee, there was discussion about how to manage that transition. If we're following that one, that the emitters could get some type of credit going into a carbon tax system going forward, but it wouldn't be. I don't know how those proposals align with the actual rules under the Western Climate Initiative. I think there would be some upset people in industry who have invested internal infrastructure in adapting to cap and trade, and also seeing, nobody wants uncertainty, especially in these days, but business especially, they don't want to see uncertainty in terms of how they're going to adhere to these things. They just want a straightforward plan. So I think there would be a lot of consternation on the side of industry and concern about the back and forth of this and what it means for them and their obligations.
Okay, great. Now, do we have any detail on what the federal fallback would look like if let's say Ontario does say no more cap and trade, and the Fed say, okay, so you're not doing it, we're going to do it for you. Here are the numbers, here's who pays. Do we have that kind of detail yet?
They have provided some in the regulatory proposals, so it actually is quite similar to what Alberta is now doing, where there'll be it's a bit of a hybrid system. So there'll be a tax on fuel, so we'll see the same increase on the fuel that we get at the pumps, but also this output-based pricing system that would apply to the larger emitters in the province. So under their rules, it's emitters that are 50,000 or emitting 50,000 tons or more per year, and there'd be certain obligations for them as well. And there would be some understanding that some ways to address the competitiveness issue and to make sure that there's no carbon leakage to other jurisdictions where there are fewer rules around this. So they're very mindful of that, but yeah, it's quite similar to what Alberta is doing.
Okay, and so, but there would be no trading then? It's, you emit this much, you're getting a bill, $50 a ton.
Essentially, yeah.
You emitted 10,000 tons, here's a bill for $500,000 or
Yeah.
whatever the math is.
And then the money is collected by the federal government, and they do it with, they either flow it back to the provincial government, like I said before, or they choose, depending on the understanding between the feds and the province, they may choose to do it differently.
Okay, and the provinces that have designed their own provincial system, we know Ontario and Quebec are cap and trade, we know BC is a carbon tax. Are most of them landing on a carbon tax system as opposed to the cap and trade system?
There is a mix. I mean, I think Manitoba, they're looking at a carbon tax system right now. Nova Scotia actually just brought forward some proposed rules for cap and trade. So there is a mix, and it really, again, it'll go back to if you have a smaller market, let's say PEI or I think New Brunswick, they have their own way of approaching this. I don't think is really going to pass the smell test with the federal government, but it depends on the size of your economy and what makes sense. So and what it's made up of. So I think right now we've seen 80% of the population in Canada is covered by some type of carbon pricing system, and both different scenarios work for different areas. So it's up to the different jurisdictions to pick which works best for them.
Right. Well, so it's fairly advanced.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds a little complex. So I think it's safe to say that even if the PC party wins the June election, it's not going to be done quickly or easily as they transition from what we have in place now to either nothing or we have to adopt the federal system. This is not going to happen overnight.
No, it's not. And that, I think, is a piece that sometimes is missing in the conversation, in that, let's say day one, the PCs decide they want to repeal cap and trade. They can issue notice to the Western Climate Initiative, because we are tangled up with these other jurisdictions now. But we also have to repeal essentially a big piece of legislation, the Climate Change Mitigation and Low Carbon Economy Act, that really outlines how the cap and trade system works, where that money goes. That would all have to disappear. And when that piece of legislation was going through, it had obviously support of the Liberals and the NDP. So provided, I think if the PCs get a majority government, they could repeal that. I won't say easy, but they could do that. It would be way more challenging if it was a minority government and they were trying to repeal that legislation.
Yeah, I would say if one of the other two parties has to support it, it's not very likely, but stranger things have happened at the Ontario legislature.
That's right.
All right, Robyn, that's great. Thanks very much. I hope that helps everybody to better understand what all this noise is about during the PC leadership race about the federal government, the provincial government, cap and trade, carbon tax. I guess the summary is stay tuned.
That's
because
right.
It's not over yet. There's a lot of work still to be done here. And for those of you who need more information, please feel free to contact Robyn. You can find her on our website at sussex-strategy.com. Robyn, thanks a lot for doing this. It certainly helped me understand all of this stuff better. Hopefully it helped everyone understand the world of carbon pricing a little bit better. And thanks to all of you for having lunch at your desk today and watching us. We'll be on every Friday. Pollsters, people from political parties, subject matter experts, all in an effort to help you make sense of everything that's going on in Ontario today. So thanks again. We'll see you next Friday.